each and every one of you, as an individual, as a person, has a role to play. And it's so important that we do this together or not at all. We can make a beautiful vision for our country, but it won't be achieved unless each and every citizen of Canada accepts the fact that they have a role to play, and it's not pretty. That they're going to have to work their guts out. They're going to have to work hard, but at the end of the day, they will have had a purpose in achieving a vision that is so much stronger.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Dialogue Over Division with my friend and colleague. Now, we've had a few podcasts together, former Colonel Lieutenant David Redman, and we're on to the sixth national interest that David has identified that helps share a vision for a nation, for a country. And as I've said in all of these episodes, I think Canada is really struggling with that right now when Canadians are a little bit, um, confused on this issue. So I'm really enjoying this conversation. And like I say, every time, everyone is super important. And then this one maybe has a little bit more personal uh, interest for me because I also come from a health and wellness background. And today's topic is personal and community well-being. And again, another topic that we just don't hear our leaders talking about at all. And it's incredibly shameful because, again, I can't wait to get into the discussion, but how can our country be healthy and how can we hold our government to account when we're struggling to get out of bed, for example, or, have energy throughout the day. So without this one, I think you started with saying it's super important from the national, from unity and national security, and that's top down, and this is very much bottom up. So looking forward to this conversation again.
Absolutely. So just to take people back, and for those that are watching this as a standalone episode, back in 2024, I wrote a paper to try and re-engage Canadians with their politicians. And in the paper, I started with the whole idea that Canada needs a 25-year vision for the future. We need something that inspires people, the citizens of our country, to want to thrive, not just survive, to pull the entire discussion from our political class, be it municipal, provincial, territorial, or federal, to pull our political leadership into looking to the future in a way that inspires people and that inspires all the citizens of our country and gives them purpose. I just had a meeting a few days ago with a group that's really concerned about the status of Canada. And one of the individuals said, it seems like Canadians have no idea of their own purpose anymore. Well, why are they here? What are they doing? What does Canada mean to them? And yet, only a few decades ago, the purpose of Canada was clear. We were a significant country on the world stage, but even more importantly, citizens woke up every morning inspired by their lives and inspired by a little flag on their shoulder, and they were so proud of the country they were part of. So when I wrote the paper, I tried to write it in a way that it could give every citizen of Canada the words, the tools to demand more of their politicians at every order of government. And so when I was a young officer in the Army, I was taught the six national interests that define our country. And so I reframed it in words that are very clear: unity, national security, good governance, rights and freedoms, economic prosperity and growth, and today's discussion about personal and community well-being. And if you define and drill down into sub-bullets every one of those six national interests, they define the whole of the country of Canada and give citizens a way to talk to politicians and say, what do you stand for? When you talk about unity, what do you mean by that? Explain to me. because we've had a previous prime minister that believed that Canada was a post-national state, had no ethics and values of its own, that its beliefs were that of the world rather than of the citizens of his own country that he had chosen to lead. So I tried to, in the paper, to inspire people to demand that we thrive, not just survive. And so, like that individual said to me, to try and give a sense of purpose back to every Canadian and to hold their politicians to a higher level of account.
Right. And as a reminder, I always tell people this is the role of citizens in a democracy. If we're not actively involved in holding our government to account and demanding action, and yesterday the word or last time was force the conversation, we're not actively participating in democracy. And then it turns out to be what we've talked about a lot, a dictator typeship authoritarian, because we're not involved in it. A democracy demands active participation. So it's innate in it. And that's what makes it more difficult for citizens because there's a role to play.
Well, and you know, each it's not new. This generation, for some reason, seems to feel that the world is tougher today than it was before. I always hearken back to my parents' generation. They grew up in the Great Depression. They then gave their 20s to fight World War II. Name me a generation that had it tougher living through the Great Depression and World War II. And yet they came out of it with a sense of optimism all the time, thinking that the world could be better, and they had a role in making it better. And so that's what I want the youth of today. I'm now a grandfather with 3 children in their mid to late 40s and 6 grandchildren who are between the ages of 19 and 22, stepping out into this wonderful country. And I want them to have a dream of thriving, of having all of the things that past generations have, understanding that they're going to have to work their guts out to get it. And I believe that nothing should be free, that everything should be a challenge, and that you should have a system where user pay, you work your way to keep your freedoms. But always remember, democracy is really messy. It's always been messy. Churchill said something to the effect that democracy is the worst form of government, other than every other one we've tried so far. So people long before us recognized the challenges of keeping a democracy alive and having a middle class instead of just the rich and the serfs, having this huge normal middle body of a society where Canadians thrive and live and have opportunities and see value and purpose in their daily lives and are inspired by their country with a 25-year vision that politicians need to strive towards, or the citizens replace them with someone who will build a beautiful 25-year vision and strive towards it. So the entire concept of individual responsibility in that society is a huge piece of what we're going to talk about today.
And I suspect we're going to get into all of this and super important. So, personal and community well being, it's not just physical, but mental. And that's already something we're talking about. And one thing you mentioned was optimism when your grandparents came out of that hard time. And that's one thing I just wanted to touch on is the pessimism of so many Canadians is like, well, there's nothing we can do. Throw our hands up in the air. Everything is broken. Everything is corrupt. Too bad, so sad, Canada's done. Um, but what I note is there's no, again, ownership of the role or having the understanding that there is an active role that they have to play in order to change the structure, the system. And so, anyway, um, when you mentioned optimism, it really hit because I do feel like a lot of people have lost that, and that was certainly the word lost hope over the COVID period, that the government abandoned and then disparaged people and worse, coerced, all these terrible things. So I can understand where people lose hope. I can understand why they're pessimistic. And so maybe if you could comment on that a little bit is why should Canadians have hope? Why should they be optimistic? And then we'll get into the details.
So I want to go back again. Churchill was an interesting guy, and so in 1940, the Germans had taken over all of Europe. Things were looking really, really bleak, and Churchill finally became the Prime Minister of England. Up till then, it had been Neville Chamberlain, and he became status, and he was the man of the hour. And we talk about optimism. In his maiden speech to Parliament as the new Prime Minister, he said something to the effect that I can only offer the citizens of Great Britain blood, sweat, toil, and tears, but there will be a better tomorrow. All right. So he said to them, this is gonna be horrible, but we can get through this, and there is a future. There is a future that isn't today, that's going to be in a decade, a rebuilding of our society. And so when we look at where Canada is today, um, maybe I should use the same words. I can only offer you blood, sweat, toil, and tears. But at the end of it, this is where we're going, and we're going together. And more importantly, what he was saying in that speech was each and every one of you, as an individual, as a person, has a role to play, and it's so important that we do this together or not at all. Because the other choice is total dictatorship. We just give Hitler England and we're done. So let's have that same discussion about Canada. We can make a beautiful vision for our country, but it won't be achieved unless each and every citizen of Canada accepts the fact that they have a role to play, and it's not pretty. They're going to have to work their guts out. They're going to have to work hard, but at the end of the day, they will have had a purpose in achieving a vision that is so much stronger. And what we see, unfortunately, in my opinion, today is the results of 20 years of helicopter parenting, followed by 20 years of bulldozer parenting, where citizens of our nation now believe it's someone else's job to have the blood, sweat, toil, and tears. It's not theirs. Government's job is to make their life perfect and to remove all risk from their lives, that they don't have to commit to those steps of hard work and self-responsibility. And so when we talk about personal and community well-being, I really emphasize in my paper and in all my talks the personal side of it, that each individual, if you want rights and freedoms, you have to work hard to protect them. They don't just magically happen. But but they're not a privilege that can be bestowed and taken away. You have them naturally, but if you don't fight for them, they will disappear, because there are people who clearly would rather have all the power and you to have none. And it doesn't matter whether you go left or right at the bottom of that circle that we've talked about in the past. If you start as an individual with all your rights and freedoms and go left towards socialism or right towards conservatism, at the bottom of that circle is dictatorship. So you have to work every day. And so part of that is taking care of yourself. One of the things that when I was a commandant of the school and I was teaching the next generation of privates and the next generation of lieutenants for the Canadian Army, I said it's an epic process, and I've used this in many discussions. It's an easy acronym to remember, EPIC, EPIC. And you, each individual in Canada, you need to be ethically fit every day and understand what ethics means to you in terms of your beliefs, your values, and the things you stand for. Ethically fit every day. You have to be physically fit so that your body doesn't let you down when you need it the most. And the body is a mechanism. I remember reading a paper once that the only reason that animals have a brain with a body is because to survive they have to move. And therefore the body is instrumental in moving this brain around in the world. And it's not just for humans, all mammals. If you have a system to move, a body that moves you around, it's to support the brain. So you have to be physically fit as you can be. And I recognize some people come with severe disabilities, but within that disability, be as fit as you can to support your ability to contribute to society. So ethically fit, physically fit. The I is intellectually fit. Lifelong learning, and we're going to talk about that in this discussion when we get to the education system as part of societal or community well-being. So constant committing yourself to not just taking what you know now, but expanding on it, learning more, learning about diverse areas, but becoming a specialist in one area and never stopping to drill down into your area of expertise so that you can contribute more to the vision for our Canadian society. But those first three, ethically fit, physically fit, and intellectually fit, are useless without the fourth, which is courage. So
Uh,
the epic process, if you don't have the courage to apply your ethics every day, to apply your physical ability to be at the right place at the right time, or your intellectual ability to apply your expertise when needed most in any given situation, then without that courage, everything is useless. So the whole idea of getting away from helicopter parenting and bulldozer parenting to make the individuals empowered again in themselves and have the courage to use those abilities and to inspire individuals to want to use and become more intellectually fit in a given area to apply it in everyday life. So to be the best at no matter what you do. My mother said to me when I was 8 years old, I don't care what you do, but whatever you do, be the best at it. She said, if you want to be a ditch digger, David, go ahead and be a ditch digger, but you better dig the straightest, deepest, best reinforced ditches known to man. Whatever
mhm.
you do, be the best at it. And so constantly challenge yourself. And that self-responsibility, that self-discipline. They always say that in ancient Greek, again said that self-discipline is the first step in self-respect. And
Mm.
self-respect is the first step to courage. So Thucydides said that that's one of his quotes, and I've always thought about that. That self-discipline, taking responsibility for yourself, is the first step to self-respect. Because without self-respect, all of the things that we're going to talk about and that we have talked about in terms of unity and national security and good, without self-respect, you don't believe you have a right to be a contributing member of society, and you don't feel you have a role in the vision for your country because, gee whiz, I'm useless. So self-discipline and
I
then
just,
self-respect.
yeah, I just want to comment on that because I think that's the way it makes sense and how things were. But it feels and it seems like there's people with no self-discipline, uh, yet have a lot of self-respect and courage. So, um, and this is so politically incorrect these days, but large obese people are being um, applauded for their courage. And they are incredibly vocal and incredibly courageous in bringing messages forward. And I, from a health perspective, look at that and I'm like, that is a body hurting themselves. It's harming um, physically their body. And so I think that what you're saying was normal 20 years ago, but I think that things have changed because though the people that are harming their own bodies are being empowered and applauded for their courage.
So there's
Any
a huge
comment?
difference between ego and bravado
Mm,
and self-respect and discipline. All
yeah,
right.
okay.
And what we've seen so many times now through many of the programs that have been in place, in particular in the last decade, is that um, the everyone, no matter how bad they are at being ethically fit, physically fit, or intellectually fit, they're all equal. But
Yeah.
they're not equal. People have to actually put an effort into all those pieces. And someone who is got a big mouth, but isn't intellectually fit and isn't the best at what their chosen expertise is just hot air moving. When I was in staff college, Toronto, so the staff college to become a colonel. Um, I was blessed with the fact that my study partner for 6 months out of the whole year was an individual who had graduated first in his class out of the German General Staff College and had come to Canada to redo Staff College with us and to learn about the Canadian Army and the Canadian Forces. And he had this little diagram. So imagine a horizontal and a vertical line, and in across the x-axis, let's put no intelligence, super intelligence, and up the vertical axis, put lazy and extremely energetic. So if you start in the bottom corner with someone who's extremely lazy and not too bright, he always said the German army was taught there's a place for those people in the German army. They do routine, mundane tasks. You give them repetitive duties. You make sure you recognize right away that they're not very bright, but they're not very energetic. So you can use them. There's a role for that in life. So now if you carry along and you get smarter and smarter and smarter, but you're still really lazy, you're going to laugh at this. Those are the best commanders
Mm,
because
yeah,
they're super intelligent, but they're
yeah,
lazy enough that they realize they need to delegate to trusted subordinates to make sure the job gets done. They don't try and do it all themselves, right? Because
yeah,
they've got that little lazy streak in them, but they're really, really smart. So they're your best commanders. So
yeah,
let's go to the box right above. And so is it the box over here. So yeah, no, the one over here. So you're still super intelligent, but now you're super energetic.
yeah,
So what are those? Those are the best staff officers. Those are the best people to get things done. And these people that are lazy but really smart, identify them really quickly, and they send them to do all the hardest tasks because they're super energetic, they're super smart, and they just want to be given a job and they attack it like a dog with a bone. And they go and go and go and go and go until it's done. And then they turn around to the boss and say, okay, what's next?
yeah,
Right? But up here in the top corner are the people that I think you were just talking about. They're super stupid or not very intelligent,
yeah.
but they're super energetic. And he
Um,
said to me, it is the job of every commander in the German army, and he said, David in the Canadian army, to identify the really stupid, super active people and throw them out of the army. Because in a single day, they can do more damage to your forces than all of the political class and everyone else. You must find the stupid, active people really quickly. So what we're trying to do in this discussion about personal and community well-being is to identify those people that are challenges to our society while super supporting those that are active smart, lazy smart, and try and give the bottom corner, the ones who have personal challenges but that are very useful in our society, but identify those that are trying to actively destroy our society.
yeah, no, that's helpful. I think really helpful, and I'm sure there's um in society always those kind of categories. So yeah,
Yeah,
makes
and
sense to me.
it applies across the whole world. And but I just thought it was really interesting from a German General Staff College #1 graduate that one of the things that he talked about is that the perfect leader is someone who's really smart but a bit lazy, so that
Yeah,
he employs the expertise that's super all over the place in our country that understands every one of the pieces that we've talked about in the six national interests. There's experts in immigration,
yeah,
experts in national security, all the seven elements. The people in economic prosperity and growth that really understand each of the sectors of our economy. What you need is a leader who knows who they are
yeah.
and who works with them, recognizes they're not the expert in everything, and brings together the task force team to develop all of those expertises to make our country thrive in a way that it has and that it can again. And so,
The
but
the
it's
other
all based on individuals.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to add is the one thing I really like about that too is I'm just so tired of being painted with the same brush as everyone else. We are all individuals and unique and have skills and talents and strengths and weaknesses, but yet I don't see any elected officials really talking about that. Any leaders in Canada identifying differences in people. It's like, again, COVID is just such a great example of all this overreach and where the government can go wrong. It's like everyone needs to do this and everyone must do these things. And it's like, no, perhaps let's identify how people are different, how their health, again, in a health pandemic or crisis. Let's talk about how different people have different requirements and maybe
Right.
help those that are vulnerable instead of painting everyone with the same brush. It's just so nonsensical to me. So identifying like those quadrants, recognizing that individuals are different, just another incredibly important aspect to this whole conversation.
And so this is the discussion that we had previously in other topics about the bottom up and top down
Yeah,
approach, and neither's perfect. So you always got to use both for
yeah.
each element of it. And one of the things I've been part of task force development for many, many programs. Closing of Canadian Forces Europe, a 2-year project, and I brought my team together. I had experts in all the areas. When I found we were missing a piece of knowledge, we would drag someone into the room, and we built a plan which stood the test of 23 months and removed a city of 18,000 Canadians out of Europe, brought them all home with all our kit, all our while still running schools, still running support to operations all through Europe. And so you bring a team together and you boil it down to all the whats, and then you pull them apart and you put them in little working groups and they figure out the hows. But not one person does that.
Mhm.
There's someone who runs and commands the process, but then all that expertise that comes in the room, because every individual brings something rare and unique, sometimes of use, sometimes not. And so you have to identify who should be in the room. When September 11th happened, Ralph Klein, the Premier of Alberta, brought together a task force on the morning of September the 12th. And I always called it, jokingly, the 26 smartest people in Alberta. They came from every walk of life. And Ralph knew
Mhm.
them because in his years in politics, both as a mayor and as the premier, he'd gotten to know these people and he knew he didn't know everything. He got them all into one room and said, okay, folks, tell me what we need to do. Step back out of the room, and those 26 people just threw all their ideas on. And at the end of it, I applied a process with them. And we walked out and wrote a new plan, which we implemented over the next 2 years, which became the Alberta Counterterrorism Crisis Management Plan. But it wasn't a plan, it was fully enacted, right? So
Mhm.
without those 26 people, we could never have done what we did to build security in Alberta such that the Americans used it as the role model when they formed DHS. All right.
Yeah.
Huge
Yeah.
chunks of it went in. So you need all those people. So when we talk about a vision for Canada, we define the 6 national interests in broad strokes. The 6, then broken down into, is 7 to 10 bullets under each one, is the what. Then you need to tear it apart, tear it apart, tear it apart to define all the tasks implied, and then bring teams of experts to write the how, to make this plan work. Again, with all those individuals, all those people that bring those rare talents into the room, now in sub working groups, that all gets rolled back up into this beautiful 25-year vision. And it's in the paper. I discuss how to do that because I described the task force concept. It's for huge problems that require massive expertise. It's not for
Yeah.
little things like managing the budget of your house. It's for bigger things where you need more and more and more experts, because Canada's a beautiful, huge country, but with huge regional differences. And we need to respect those and respect the reason why we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, and build a structure that's going to work across our country, but not the same for everyone and not the same for every piece of geography. So you go to COVID, the first step you always do when you're doing any kind of an assessment is the threat assessment. What's the hazard? And so in COVID, the hazard was this new evolving virus, which by February 2020, we knew was only a risk to the senior population over 65 with severe multiple comorbidities. So why did we do a response that punished children? Okay.
Yeah.
So just when you have leaders that haven't spent their time being that intellect and being the smart lazy, but also being with the experience and the knowledge, like Ralph Klein on September the 11th, he didn't sit in his office and say, okay, we're going to do this, 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 and this. He said, I need to get a group of 26 really smart people together that come from every walk of life, all of our private sector, all of our public sector, put them in a room and have them give me options,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, and yeah, makes sense. And like personally, I am not good with process and it's strict like that kind of thing. Like to jump in, but I want to work with somebody that can help establish those processes because I think that that could be not maybe just more effective, but more long term. And you would think that that would be something, especially for a public institution and a government, that you don't want to just jump in with a solution, but you want to have established processes that will work and then maintain it.
that work
Um,
in a timely fashion too.
yeah,
So
yeah,
sometimes speed is of the essence, and sometimes a more labored, a slower approach to make sure you don't miss something. But as a young officer in the Army, I was taught what was called procedure. It was 13 steps. So it's a logical process. You get shot at by a rifle from over here. What are you going to do? You got 37 soldiers behind you. You got to make decisions. You have to do it quickly. The advance has to continue. So there's a step-by-step process. And what it did is it made your brain have a routine. Okay, it gave you a routine, and that then developed into the estimate of the situation, which is now called the operational planning process. The steps become clearer and more defined the larger the problem. So by the time you were training to be a colonel, it covered things like closing a city of 18,000 people and getting them out of a foreign country, closing all our battle groups out of the former Republic of Yugoslavia and getting them all home safe without killing them. Okay, so the problems get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so when you're working in government, one of the things that we should be training our civil service to do is process. And when I joined the government of Alberta, it's one of the things I found a complete absence of was this process. But it only comes from doing it over and over and
yeah,
over. So like everything else, I always said, as the head of EMA, I'm the expert in nothing except process. I
mhm,
know how to get a group of people together and in 10 minutes, 10 days, or 10 years to achieve something. But that process is always the same, and I can do it really fast or I can do it slower, or I can do it really slow if depending on the size of the problem. But I can't do it without a mass of expertise, which comes in the form of individuals. And
yeah,
knowing who they are and how to get them inspired to come and join your team is what I think the political leadership in this country needs to do. They need to know the people that will make our country thrive and bring them together in a task force with people who can run the process for them to pull all that out. But you're not coming with the perfect solution. You're coming,
yeah,
that's the other piece of the military. You always know you can the best you're going to get is an 80% solution because damn it, the enemy keeps changing what he's doing and you'll never know everything. So you have to make decisions in the absence of knowledge sometimes. So you need a process that will pull our country forward to the 80% solution, but it gets refined every 5 years as you refine your vision for the country, right? And you keep moving in the right direction. You don't take sidetracks. So it's trying to inspire the political leadership to define that vision based on the six national interests and then not do anything that doesn't fit the vision, right?
mhm,
Don't go
yeah,
on sidetracks. No, we only got so much money. It comes out of taxpayer, the individual's pockets. So when we're talking about those individuals in that epic process and ethically fit, physically fit, and intellectually fit, I'm expecting Canadian citizens to want that for themselves because that's what gives self-discipline turns into self-confidence. And so you end up with a bunch of people who have good confidence that's justified, that's not bravado, that's
mhm,
not ego. They put the effort in, but you need someone like a good political leader that can say, that one's full of ego. That one's full of knowledge. I'll take the one with the knowledge, not the one with bluster.
mhm, yeah. I think we are definitely seeing a lot of the ego these days.
So maybe just talk just a little bit about personal health because
Yes.
you talked about it, and personal health to me is all three of those things: ethically fit, physically fit, intellectually fit. But I want to really hit the point. That's an individual's responsibility. It's not the government's responsibility to tell you to eat right and work out. That's what you should have learned in your family upbringing, right? That's your parents' role. That's the family unit role. And this, you can't shame my child because they're obese. Well, actually, your child should be ashamed to be obese, and you should be helping your child learn how to have a healthier lifestyle and stop using fast food every day to feed your child because you're too lazy to cook, right? And I don't want to belittle anybody, but it's an individual responsibility from the parent and ultimately as the child grows up, the child, right? And so if you choose to do things that aren't good for your body, you know you're doing them,
Yeah.
right?
W Well, and the one thing I wanted to say about this too, and, you mentioned it earlier about the government, and I wanted to ask you, but isn't it the government's responsibility and job to take care of us and keep us safe? Because that's what I think some people think, and certainly lots of, government officials have been saying, "That's my" like, the prime minister said that repeatedly throughout COVID. It's his job to keep Canadians safe.
Okay,
And yeah, I don't think that's his role. And
national security is a role in a democracy for government because one individual can't defend a country.
yeah,
And so when a group of individuals band together who share common ethics and values, going right back to the very first discussions we had on unity, a group of
yeah,
individuals that come together to share common ethics and values and who are prepared, they're prepared to define the geography they live in and defend the borders of that geography. That is the basic essence of a nation. So that comes with the people willing to defend the borders that define their country. So that's the role of the federal government, is to ensure that we have all those pieces that we talked about in national security, the Canadian Forces being the very last one, but the starting at the top, an intelligence system, then border services, then immigration services, then working down critical infrastructure protection, all of those. But that's the citizens' expectations of themselves and their willingness to contribute towards that. What's not included in that is using the word safety rather than security. Okay? The
yeah,
difference between the two words. And safety now has been usurped to mean the government can do whatever it wants to you and just say, well, we're doing this with an abundance of caution. How many times
uh-huh,
did you hear that during COVID? And right now, they're
uh-huh,
still saying it. With an abundance of caution, you can't walk in the woods. Okay? Safety has been perverted. The role of government is security, define borders, defending our common ethics and values. But public safety is a thing. And every time a citizen gives up, I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said anyone who is willing to give up a small amount of rights and freedoms in order to guarantee a small amount of safety deserves neither rights or freedoms nor safety.
yeah,
Individuals have to be responsible to the greatest degree possible for their own safety. And as the head of emergency management, my tube chart always started with the citizen
yeah,
and worked its way up to first responders when citizens simply couldn't have the training and equipment. Then it worked its way up to municipal government, but it was a bottom up approach, always expecting the citizen would take care of themselves for 72 hours unless they were directly impacted by the hazard. We've gone top down. We now say the federal government's responsible for everything, and the citizen basically ends up responsible for nothing.
yeah,
And one of the heads of emergency management out of New Brunswick said one time jokingly, this is back in 2003, he said, everyone now, we've got all these websites to say what's in the 72-hour preparedness kit because people aren't smart enough to know what they should have in their own home to take care of themselves for 72 hours. So every province and territory has these lists and we update them and we add to them and everything else. He says, back when I was growing up, we had a 72-day preparedness kit
uh-huh,
because it was called winter, and our parents just got ready for winter. Nobody told them, nobody gave them a list, nobody. That's called self responsibility
yeah,
leading to self confidence, right? And so, this whole idea that the government is responsible for safety is wrong.
yeah,
The citizen only gives up its rights and freedoms in tiny increments to achieve perhaps a little more safety and have a fire department, have a police department, have a EMTs. But each of those steps is simply because there's not enough time in a life to make every one of us an expert in all of those things, right? So
And
again,
those are for emergency situations. You
not
shouldn't.
the day-to-day life.
Yeah,
And you always use the minimum. When I wrote the counterterrorism plan for our province, my statement was every time we believe we need to deny a right or freedom, it will be for the smallest amount of time, for the smallest geographic area, and there will be a complete explanation why, and we'll remove it as quickly as we can, because if we don't, the terrorists won. The entire aim of the terrorists was to remove our rights and freedoms and to turn us into what their society looked like. And so don't give up any right or freedom without, number one, an Oakes test justification in the courts that you're prepared to defend. And yes, sometimes you have to do it before you can get to the courts to justify it. But in the legislature, that's what the premier should have been doing every day. I'm not locking you down, and here's why.
yeah,
Explain why. This
yeah,
virus is only deadly for this group area of our population. And this is what we're going to do to seniors in long-term care homes, where this is the assistance we're going to, if they choose it. We're not going to lock them seniors in a senior's home unless they are so afraid they want it. So we'll make a dirty and a clean seniors home. So those who still want all their freedoms and their family come to visit can have it. And those that really are terrified and want the government to totally care for
yeah,
them, we'll offer that, give them, but
yeah.
everyone else, live your life.
Well, and just on that one too, psychologically, the impact for the older folks that couldn't leave or couldn't visit, like just like that one broke my heart so much too, because they like you're already older and you only have a few years left to live, maybe. Like let them enjoy those last few years. But
They
like what
say
a great option,
more
like
of
you
our
said.
seniors died of loneliness,
Yeah,
and they simply gave up, that life wasn't worth living in the seniors home than
yeah,
from COVID, right? They simply gave up because they couldn't see their family. There was no purpose. They had no purpose left to live. And
yeah,
there's real experts in seniors long-term care homes that were never invited by the government, the medical officer of health, or the premier to their office to say, this is how we could manage this in seniors and long-term care homes. They
yeah.
were never
That,
even invited to the equation. The rules were simply, bam, they're
yeah.
closed. We've locked the doors.
Stupid. Just like plain stupidness.
And yet we're seeing exactly those
Mm.
same actions here. So when we talk about personal, I always keep coming back to it. It's the individual. The individual has to start taking self-responsibility in much greater ways, and we've got to get away from helicopter parenting, bulldozer parenting. So let's get to the next step when we get into
Yeah.
community well-being, because there's two. I don't want to step over the healthcare system because both physical and mental health care is huge part of the discussion in this block, and we need real experts to talk about the different options for delivery of healthcare in both mental and physical in our society, and what's individuals' responsibility and what. Those are huge discussions. And again, I'm not the expert. I want to bring those experts in and have a real
And
discussion that
just
isn't triggered by ideology.
yes. Oh my gosh, like adults.
But I want to talk about education. This is a
Yeah.
huge piece of societal well being. From the time a child is born until they're 18, the formation of that child isn't the role of the state, it's the role of their family. Now, into the family, we slowly evolve more people like teachers. Okay, and teachers are essential. And I remember the rule in my house, I think we might have mentioned this in a previous episode. My dad always said to me, you go to school, you learn, you do the best you can, you get physically fit, you get mentally fit, you get the maximum you can out of school. But if I find that you've embarrassed the family by doing something wrong or inappropriate in school, if your teacher disciplines you, you'll get double it when you get home. My teacher was supported. My teacher knew that my family trusted her or him as I went through school to help raise me with the ethics and values that my family expressed. Now, if they thought for some reason that a teacher was inappropriate, touching children, all the rest of this kind of stuff, then the parents got together and the teacher left. But not a parent. the parents, right?
Mhm.
Because more
Yeah.
than one child said, this guy's doing something. Anyhow, the whole point was I knew my teacher was empowered by my family, by my parents, right? And that they said, you know, one day I decided in grade three, me and a buddy got up and we ran all over the roof of the school.
Fun.
We found a way to get up there, which was off limits, and we ran all over it like stupid kids, not realizing that the thunder of our footprints went into every classroom and the head office that we ran around. So I ended up in detention, grade three. And when I
Yeah.
got home, my mother's first question was, "Why are you late?" I knew better than to lie. Again, right? Self responsibility. I did it. I took the punishment. She said, "Wait till your father gets home." Now, to his credit, my dad was a police officer at that time. He'd been a pilot during the war. He came home and he looked at me and he said, "What did you do?" So I explained what we'd done. He said, "Pretty stupid, wasn't it?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you learn not to do that again?" I said, "Yeah, or to be way quieter when I do it." He burst out laughing. He said, "Don't do it again." I said, "You betcha, Pop." First offense,
Yeah.
punishment fit the crime, right? But I knew I was going to have to face down my father, right? And
Yeah.
and and I knew he was an intelligent man, a reasonable man. So the whole idea of education is we need to give that power back to our teachers so that the hooligans in the class don't run the class and all the other good students then don't get their education because the teacher has to spend their whole day dealing with the hooligan. And so number one, empowering teachers. Number two, the curriculum in our school has to be reading, writing, arithmetic, right? It has to be the development of the individual intellectually to be able to take on the world. Where does the child get their morals and values and beliefs? From their parents and from whatever spiritual institutions the family chooses, not the school.
Mhm.
Because the minute the school becomes the definer of all cultural, ethical, and belief systems, the danger is obvious. We've seen it in communist countries, we've seen it in fascist countries. When the schooling makes the children turn into enemies of their parents,
Yeah.
you have either a communist society or a fascist society. You've gone that far down the circle going either way. So I want teachers to teach intellectual subjects, but I understand the school system quite well. I've got a daughter who's worked her way up through the education system and is now a principal in a school. When the principal of the school has to spend all their time dealing with children that explode like time bombs in classrooms, which make it impossible for the other children to learn, or to deal with the parents that are screaming at all the teachers because they're not DEI aware or socially aware or whatever the word is today, that academic education dies, right?
Yeah.
There just isn't time. You can't breathe anymore when you're only dealing with those two sides of the issue. So I want our schools to be the cornerstone of teaching individual responsibility, the correct role for government, perhaps, but more importantly, the academic subjects to allow them to thrive in any profession that the child chooses, knowing and understanding the differences between all the children, because some children, less than 5% of our society needs a university education. Most should be taught and learn those core subjects to thrive in the trades, to thrive in blue collar and semi blue collar jobs, because that's what they're really good at. Remember that block
Yeah.
before? In the army, we recognized that some people just weren't cut out to be artillery because they could never figure out how to do the trajectory rounds and all the rest of it. They couldn't do the math, right? So
Yeah.
so it wasn't that they were incapable of being really thriving citizens in our society. It's just not everybody should go to university. And yet we have a system that tries to push 85% of our children to universities when only 5%, maybe at max 15%, should ever even go there. Because what are you looking for? You're looking for an education to be able to have a job. We talked about this yesterday in the previous session. To thrive having an ability to have a job, to support your family, to have private property, to be educated enough to live a great life. But
Yeah.
each individual is different, right? So when we talk about the entire concept of all the way through, but one of the key pieces that we're missing in our education system, in my opinion, is the pride in Canada. So from grade 1 through to grade 12, history must be taught or history will be repeated. And so when we talk about coming around either left or right to the bottom to dictatorship, why should they be proud of Canada? I know why. I was served in a uniform all over the world, and I had people from every walk of life all over the world talking about Canada and telling me how lucky I was to be a Canadian. And we need to make sure that our education system teaches the history of Canada with all its warts, but the real history of our country, not one where we apologize every day for each year of the formation of our country, because our country is completely different. And we should be highlighting those differences in terms of how Canada came to be. Compare it to the United States and how they treated their First Nations and how we treated First Nations, how we did the expansion and how we established the rule of law in each of the provinces and territories completely different, and all of the huge success stories of accepting immigrants into our country and the wonderful lives that within a generation were able to have, but the expectations and teaching that piece of unity. Remember back in unity when we talked about the defining ethics and values and beliefs of Canada? That should be taught in every grade and refreshed and refreshed and refreshed all the way through school so that the children, when they leave school, know what Canada is compared to other countries in the world and why they should have a pride in their country, not a misplaced pride, knowing the warts of our history so we don't repeat our history, but not apologizing every day. And to me, that's a huge piece of that first piece of public education up to grade 12. When I talk with my grandchildren and we talk about Canadian history, half of the things I ask them, they simply have never heard of, and I send them to go read books, but they should have learned that in grade 8, right? And all the
Yeah.
rest of it. And half the time, the history I get back isn't the history of Canada. It's the history of a social activist. All
Yeah.
right. So that that formation. Then when you get to the next level, education being so critical. Then when you get to technical schools, trade schools, all that we should have this great, huge emphasis on getting people the tools they need to thrive in our society. In what, as they came through school, one of the things they should be finding out is, I really love electricity. Man, I want to know where that water goes when I flush the toilet. Gee, I can't understand how my house can be both hot and cold, winter and summer, right? How do you build a house? I wonder what a carpenter does, and show them by the time you're in grade 7 or 8, take them out to see the skilled trades in action. Take them to show, and because pounding nails might be just exactly because every trade doesn't end with pounding nails. By the time you're 40, you're either a supervisor of a team building houses or building skyscrapers, or now you've gone back to school and now you are ready for university to become an engineer to design the best house, not just the house you were taught to build, but when you were building it, you figured out, that's not right. I could do that better and bring those ideas into, this continuous learning as you get older and older and older. So the whole idea of what is post-secondary education for and what is the idea of labor, skilled trades, university, why do we have universities? And is universities, when they were first designed way back, was to take the aristocracy to take young men and get them from 16 to 22 without destroying themselves of the world. It gave them 4 years to grow up. So they were taught, the greats like, Greek history and Greek theology and all this stuff. And they were able to quote every great book ever read or everything else. It had nothing to do with preparing them for an actual job in the world, right? It was to give them time to mature. And so we've taken that kind of an institution and now we've made things like teachers need a Bachelor of Education, nurses need a Bachelor of Nursing. Why? Why weren't they brought up in the education system. And their education was first a little bit of theory and then go apply it in a classroom and do that for 2 years. And now you're a teacher. A nurse, when my sister went through nursing, she worked in a hospital for 3 years and came out a nurse. Theory
Yeah.
maxed with daily practical, theory in the morning, practical every afternoon. But now the universities have taken over the domain of education and teaching, and it's not about the children and it's not about the patients. It's about the individual learning a ton of theory and a ton of paper process rather than how to care for a patient or how to care for a child and educate a child. So we need to
Yeah.
redefine why we have universities and what do they do.
So much to talk about here. A few comments that I have and wanted to touch on. Pride in Canada, so important. And I think that is maybe one of the biggest and shameful differences, I think, between Canada and the United States. Adam, and you could say what you want about the United States, but one thing that they do have, most people, is pride in their country, and they will stand up for it, and they know their history a lot better than Canadians do. And one reason that I wanted to write the book, Reconnect to Canada, was because I felt like a lot of the issues that we're talking about now in 2020, 2025 are issues that we've dealt with before. These are not things that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We could look to see what happened in some of the cases, how hate speech was dealt with in Canada, because this isn't the first time that people have been hateful and harmful in society. So maybe let's look back and see what the Supreme Court said about that. Same with personal autonomy. So I found that super important. Let's go back to these cases and see what the discussion in Canada was there. Was it correct? Should we expand on what was decided? And I think in our first conversation, you reminded me too about even the history in Canada and the discussion on Alberta independence and becoming a 51st state. These are not new issues. These are debates that were had earlier on. And it's like, if we just understood that and then expand on the conversation, I think we would be in a better place than rather than pretending that we have all these problems and it's impossible to solve.
Well, exactly. Churchill again, right? Every form of government is the worst form of government, except for every other one we've tried before. We it's a democracy is a continuous evolution. It's a
Yes.
continuous learning improvement. Sometimes two steps forward, one step back, right? So it's but if you just throw in the towel and think that you can make a more perfect democracy by running away from the one you're already in, I put it to you, you're in for a delusional experience for the first year, which is followed by a crash and burn in the
Yeah.
second through fifth year, when you suddenly realize that those same citizens are your citizens, right?
Yeah.
And this whole helicopter parenting, bulldozer parenting that has now created 40 years of mature adults in their 40s and early 50s that don't believe that risk is their responsibility will be your citizens. They're the same ones. And so we want to evolution rather than revolution. As a soldier, I lived in some pretty horrible places with my backpack and rifle and my wonderful team of soldiers. I don't ever want to see in Canada what I saw in civil wars in other countries. And people got to understand that evolution, while slow and muddy and sometimes massively frustrating, is a hell of a lot better than watching an entire generation of children be wiped from the face of the earth and murdered. So y- y- and out of revolution rarely comes what you want. The Russian people overthrew the Tsar only to replace it with Stalin, Lenin, and
Yeah.
Stalin. Right. So remember that y- you want to use process. Go back to process. And when we end this, remind me just to have a very quick wrap up on what is a task force and why, and
Sure.
why I think that's exactly what the political class in our country needs to do. But the whole idea of what we're talking about in personal and community well-being is it always does start with the individual. From the time you're first born until you're 18, it's your parents and your small community's responsibility to help prepare you to be an adult who accepts personal responsibility and therefore has um, um, per, pride in their person, and then is ready to walk out into the country called Canada and contribute in a meaningful way. And so we always come back to both personal and community well-being in me and all the pieces that make it up. So we need to have a detailed task force on healthcare, a detailed task force on education, and break that into you know, public schooling, post schooling, whether it's trades or labor, or because some people shouldn't even go to trade school, labor, right?
Yeah.
Remember that group, that little box down in the corner, not smart enough to but slow enough that you really use them. There's lots of people in our society who will very happily and in a meaningful life be a stock boy for their whole lives, stock
Yeah.
man, stock woman, whatever, right? it, it's okay, long as you
Yeah.
can earn enough to ultimately have a family, own private property, and feel at the end of the day you're contributing to society, and know how you fit and be proud of yourself, have self-worth, right? And so instead of degrading those people that maybe not ever be fit for university, what a great opportunity awaits them, right? In
Yeah.
terms of their family and their future and the things they can do.
And it goes with what we were saying before, not painting everyone with the same brush. Let's acknowledge their unique weaknesses and
And celebrate their
advantage.
strength.
Yeah, strength. Yeah. So the other thing I found very interesting that you were talking about was the parental role and the versus the teacher, because when you were in school, the teacher was empowered by your parents, and it's very interesting because the one time I was blocked by, or not the one time, now there's more, unfortunately, an MLA here in Alberta. Literally, my comment had to do with this point, and I said, because it has to do with the parental rights in Alberta, and that the teachers had to talk to the kids, or whatever. I can't even remember because that was a few years ago. But my comment was, since when did a state actor, the teachers, become the hero and the parents are being painted as the villain? And I said, as a mother, don't you want your child coming to you first when they're vulnerable, when they're scared, rather than some state actor? Really, that's who it is. A teacher that's there maybe 1 year of their life. And that was all it took to get me blocked. But it just, if you think about that for a little bit, that's not a very productive or healthy or nurturing environment for that child too. That teacher is not going to be in their life later, and
So it's a
so you're
balance,
ruining that
right? It's a
relationship. Yeah.
balance because,
Yeah.
again, understanding inner city schools versus rural schools, frequently what we see is completely broken families. Right?
Mm.
So, yes, we have developed a safety net for children where we know the family unit that they come from is, let's just put it nicely, dysfunctional. And so either it's a single parent who's doing their best, or a single parent who's not even trying. Parents who are both drug addicts, parents. There's so many combinations, but we already have a really
Social
built
services.
system of social services to
Yes.
manage that. And so what's happening is teachers in the classroom have for a decade now been expected to handle all the social issues of our society rather than teach subjects.
Yeah.
Instead, it used to be when you saw a child that was at risk, the teacher referred it to the principal referred it to the appropriate agencies, sometimes the police, but more normally the social services, who then came in and developed a program for that child. Now,
Yeah.
what we have is social activist teachers in the classroom deciding they're the experts. And remember when I said you bring a task force with all the expertise? These teachers were never taught any of this. They
Hmm.
weren't taught
Yeah.
any of this stuff. And yet
Yeah.
now they believe they know more than any parent. And so even the children who come from great families, the state now is deciding what the children will be taught. And we are getting to the point where we see the Hitler Youth happening in our schools, calling out their parents. We were on a trip, my wife and I, in China. And the lady who took us on the tour was one of the children who, when Mao did the youth movement back in the 1960s, early 70s, all the children in the schools reported their parents who they believed had turned into capitalist pigs, and the parents were taken, beaten in Tiananmen Square, and taken by busloads out to be farmers in the fields, and most of them died. And she very proudly told us on this tour about her experience denouncing her parents. Well, this is where we've got to in Canada at the very start of that curve, okay?
Yeah.
Where we see children denouncing their parents because they won't let them have whatever the latest fad is in grade 8, right?
Yeah.
In terms of gender or DEI issues or whatever it is. And the teachers are the ones supporting this attack on the family unit. And
Yeah.
so that the whole idea to me, and as you point out, when I was raised, my parents empowered my teacher and expected me to live up to the ethics and values of my family and not to embarrass my family in the school, not vice versa. Right?
Yeah.
That I should go home and spew the ethics and values of my teacher on my family. And my dad, if I ever tried something, I didn't, but if I had, my dad would have looked at me and laughed and said, okay, so who's paying for dinner tonight? Because clearly you know how to run the world better than I do, right? That's would have been the answer I got.
Yeah.
The whole idea is when you're 18, I want you fit to fight. I want you ready to walk out the door and be ready to balance a bank book, to hold down a career in whatever career you choose. And you can bounce around 16 times if you want, but to have all the skill sets you need to be a contributing Canadian in a society that's free and open, where you're prepared to do your part in a 25-year vision that excites and inspires you. And so this whole bit about personal and community well-being is, how do we create the next generation? There's some lost causes, I'm sad to say, that have bought into a different type of country, and maybe they will see later in life that there's different ways of doing things, but some are so hardened down in ideology now. But that's the part of this discussion that you always want to support. You just want the discussion to be
Well,
respectful and for people to learn from each other, because
yeah.
there's tons of things to learn from people who have gone far right, people who have gone far left. There's lots to learn from them, but not if it's about destroying the country they live in.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's obviously one we have to that there is lots of that and we have to identify it. I think and just call it out is like, are you trying to destroy this country or make it better, or
Yeah.
what is your intention in for the future? I thought it was also interesting what you were saying about university, and then you just said now to when you were leave 18 and you could try 20 different careers. And so personally going through 9 years of post-secondary education, once you like that's the one thing too that I don't agree with, is it not with you, but with how the system is now set up, is that you go into this field when you're 18 or so, fingers crossed, you know what you're doing. Thankfully, I had actually 5 years of post secondary before I picked law, which I think was a good decision for me. But otherwise, you go into something, you you end up putting 10 years of your life, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Then you first day on the job, you're like, "Oh, shoot. This is not something for me." 100% I am supportive and agree that there has to be a more interactive component, and I think most lawyers will agree that, like, there's only so much you could learn in books, and then once you start in practice, that's when you really start to apply and understand the law. Friends that went to med school said, "Do not go to hospitals on, like, I think it's July 1st, because that's when the new residents come in, and they literally don't know anything because they've just been in the textbooks the whole time."
Yep.
So, like, the system clearly is not make doesn't even make sense. You indebt somebody, or they're in debt. It only makes sense for the university, really, because they come out with the best outcome. But for people, like, it's good to give them an opportunity to try things, see what fits, see what doesn't fit before making these long term and financial commitments that are required right now, too.
Is the aim of education to broaden the mind, and there's a real role for that, or is it to find employment? And it's the push me, pull me. Again, there's
Mhm.
no perfect system. If it's to broaden the mind, then you know at the end of it, you're not going to be walking out into a job, right? And
Yeah.
so a Bachelor of Arts is to broaden the mind, and there's no job at the end of it. The Army, in my opinion, I was both as a captain for 3 years. I was a captain instructor in the school, teaching field tactics and then how to operate a fully operational maintenance organization in combat. And then I came back as the commandant, and it was far a broader responsibility to create citizens that were going to wear a uniform while learning all the other stuff. The Army had a process, and we always said that there was always two components: knowledge and skill. And so for every lesson, when you finished getting the knowledge, we then made you do it. And we did it over and over and over. And so in a 13-week summer training period, there would be 5 weeks broken up of knowledge, but after every 2 or 3 days, it was pick up your rifle, pick up your ruck, get in the back of that truck. We're going out in the desert and we're going to do what we just told you how to do.
Yeah.
And you're going to screw it up over and over and over and over again till we actually know that what we taught you for those 3 days, now 3 days later, you can actually do. Something stupid is how to dig a proper sled trench to save your life, right? How to command a platoon of 37 soldiers in an attack, how to go a right flank, a left flank. It sounds great on a blackboard, not so easy when you're actually getting people to do what you learned in theory, right? So as a lawyer, to me, you should have no more than 3 months of learning the concepts of law and how the court operates and everything else. And then you should be stuck beside someone on the bench and live through it and embarrass the shit out of yourself, realizing, I better go back and reread what I thought I had learned in week 2, right? And because in the Army, it was that constant in your face, and they was never derogatory. They'd just look at you, right? And it was like, oh, frick. I guess I better go back and figure out what I did, because that turned out like crap, right? I
Yeah.
remember having a group and we were doing an assault. I was an instructor at the time, and they had cleared a whole section, and all of a sudden they came under attack. And I'm not kidding. Up one section at a time, groups of 15, they turned and fled. But they fled right down a route they hadn't cleared. Instead of going back the way they cleared, they ran straight into an enemy ambush. Like, that's not what we taught you. The reason you cleared this route was now you have a safe forming up place to fall back to should you come under a real fire. Uh, But that lesson stuck. I remember one of those students 20 years later came up to me, because I used to call it the last retreat of the lemming. I'd pick red berries and I'd bounce them off the hood of a Jeep. This guy was now a full colonel. So he passed me in rank. I was out of the Army, but he came to tell me the story at a meeting, and he said, I never forgot that, because it was so embarrassing what we did. But in the heat of the moment, it seemed like the right thing to do. But because of that, I didn't do this later in
Yeah.
life, right? Going through his career. You have to experience it. It has to be practical. So this whole education system that we talked about, and we desperately need a task force on each block of education in our country, to the real experts to talk about the purpose of education. Is it for greater awareness of the world, or is it for a job? Decide what each is for, put it in the right category, only funnel the appropriate people to the appropriate places, and by allowing them to choose their path, not by forcing them to choose a path. But at the end of the day, if we don't have this discussion about the relationship between theory and practice,
Yeah.
education is not education.
Well, and one thing I think it's almost gone full circle from when we started is you were talking about how you were in this task force with people saying there's no purpose in life. To me, almost purpose in life is having these tests and learning and guide. If we're going to pretend that the government is going to give us a safe place and we don't, like, they're going to keep us safe and everything's going to be perfect, literally, there is no purpose to life. The whole point is to try, learn, course correct, change, laugh about it.
360 BC,
Yes.
Thucydides talked about self-respect. If you don't have self-respect, if you're not proud of who you are and how you got there and what you're going to do next, you have no purpose. There is
Yeah.
no purpose, right? You must have
So one thing
self-respect.
Yeah, one thing we didn't talk about is healthcare, and maybe we'll just talk about it a little bit, and then I think it might go into the task force component, which I love that you brought that up, and I definitely do want to end on that. But on healthcare, I don't know how what you said earlier, but it's certainly a conversation we need to be having in this country, and this is, maybe a strange example, maybe not, that I was like pondering about is one MLA in Alberta was really up in arms that the government supposedly got rid of cookies for cancer patients' children, like children that are cancer patients. I had cancer issues. Like, I'm not dismissing any of this, but then I was thinking, is that really the goal of our government and healthcare to be giving cookies to children? I get it, they're in the healthcare and going through cancer treatments, but most cookies aren't helpful for health. So have we gone way too far? Even like we're not even having that conversation in Canada right now. Is what is healthcare and what is it that we're supposed to be offering people? Because once I started thinking about these cookies, I wouldn't want those being given to people. So and I get it. It's something, you know, to make them happy, but maybe we could have a clown there instead that isn't going to cause the health detriments to the children that are trying to get healthy.
Well,
Ugh,
it's the mental health has this spiritual side and the physical side and the whole idea of
yes.
healthcare. So again, yes, definitely a task force. We need to from ground up. It used to be a zero-based accounting, for budgets, but same thing for this. Zero-based. Let's start from nothing and decide what healthcare will be in our country. And let's start with
Yeah.
the role of the individual. There used to be a morning show in Canada 2 decades ago, and one of the things is they always had the guy on who'd written the latest book or the lady on the latest exercise book, and it was always how to be your best self. And they used to joke, the two announcers used to joke between them, we could make a fortune. We just got to write a book. And I think it's all about eating right and exercising.
Okay. Can I just say, what about Get Fit and Have Fun people that were all over Canadian, like TV out, like, and that was lovely.
Yep.
What a message.
So
And
let's
you
talk
don't hear
about
that.
that in
Yeah.
kindergarten. Let's talk about that in grade 6 and all the way up.
Yeah.
And the one subject that should be compulsory in every single grade under the age of 18 is PE, physical education. And yes, some of it's theory about what to eat and what is good and all the rest of it. But the majority of it is run around the gym 600 times, climb that rope, get those weights out. Teaching children how to make the most of the wonderful body they've got that carries their brain around to the greatest of their personal ability. And some will go
Yeah.
to be stars and some will never get past, doing 6 laps of the gym. But the bottom line is you have to developed the body. Okay, remember my epic, ethically fit,
Yeah.
physically fit, intellectually fit. So the whole idea that a healthy body leads to a healthy mind, the whole idea that the two are connected, they're not, you can't just be intellectually bright and have a broken body. That's the rare exception. Normally a body will drag down the brain, right? So you,
Yeah.
you, you gotta, so in our education system, let's go back to personal health, zero based, work our way up from the time parents should be encouraging their children, not necessarily in organized team sports, just going out, going for a walk in the woods. In Germany, there used to be Volts marches. We used to take our kids and do 5 kilometer walks with them when they were little, 10 kilometer walks when we were back as teenagers. Just get out in the fresh air, go for a walk, hike, camp. The whole idea of a healthy body is a healthy mind, and they work together. So that's number one in our healthcare system. And
Yeah.
I've heard lots of people talk about healthcare accounts where the government takes money from you and then gives it back to you so that you'll go and do something, some healthy sport or activity. No, I think that's the family's job. Sorry. I just want people to relish the fact that they have a wonderful thing called a body. All right. So
Yes.
so let's start with those participation ads again that we used to be in the
Yeah.
1960s, and government programs I don't want, but you used to be able to get the silver, the bronze, and the gold if you did so many things. No, I just wanted it encouraged in our schools. I wanted it encouraged in our families and all the way up. So now, if you start with a healthier society, we need to take the Health Canada food pyramid, throw it out, and have a real discussion about what is healthy food. Not what does Kellogg's want you to eat, because they paid to make sure the bottom of the pyramid was all grains, right? I want to get big industries influence out of healthcare and have a
Hmm.
real discussion from people who understand the human body in terms of being physically fit, right? So let's have that discussion on healthcare. So as you remember, the healthcare system as you go up should be for as you age, perhaps parts of your body start to deteriorate. It doesn't have to in many cases. Unhealthy lifestyle leads to that. But I want a healthcare system that can then deal with the people who have real critical issues, either through
Yeah.
accident or through genetics or through whatever, that we can offer to those people the full focus of our support. Let's go back to COVID. Instead of treating the entire population of Canada for a virus that was no worse, and in fact, most cases less deadly than seasonal influenza, we tried to treat everyone as if they were going to die from COVID.
Yeah.
Let's make our medical system stand on its head and really focus all their effort on those who have a real physical, mental, or emotional challenge and have all the resources we need for those people while the rest of the people get on with their lives, live a
Yeah.
healthy lifestyle. And I don't want to punish people who don't live a healthy lifestyle, but sooner or later there has to be consequence for being a burden on your fellow citizens, right? And the First Nations people of our country were a little more pragmatic. You went for a walk in the snow when you slowed the tribe down. I don't want to get there. What I'm talking about is having a healthcare system that follows the patient and focuses on the patient, not follows the doctor and focuses on the doctor. I don't want our institutions to be more important than the patient. I want each patient to be treated individually, but given solid advice on diet and exercise as the first course of treatment, along with when something catastrophic happens, the ability to bring those resources as required. There are some tremendous models in the world. Let's start with Japan. Look at the Japanese healthcare system. It's a real model to look at, and it's a real mix of private and public, but it's a single user pay system. So whenever you're referred to any of the private institutions, the money follows the patient, right? So the
Yeah.
patient and the whole aim of the institution is to make you as healthy as fast as you can so they can take another one,
Yeah.
right? Not
Makes
so
sense.
that they can just get more doctors, but they
Yeah.
get more patients.
Yes. Yeah. No, the healthcare system and health in Canada and Western society is a topic I am so interested in. But
Needs a
that's
task
one.
force with
Yeah.
credible people, and
Yeah.
I don't want it built just by doctors. Okay?
So this is where I'm glad you mentioned the task force, because there are a few in Alberta right now, and I've been a bit critical about them because I attended one and it was a gong show. It was really unpleasant to be there. I felt I don't know, like I, even though I wasn't being attacked, it was just emotionally charged, divisive anger. And Alberta has announced another task force, and it's, to me, I say random faceless people that have no buy-in. Like, it's not the elected officials. I don't know who these people are, even though they're introduced, but I'm like, okay, and who are they to me? Like, I don't get that part. And really, the premier is getting most of the attacks, obviously, because she's the one that you have some sort of
The
connection with.
focus, yeah.
So how do you see a task force, yeah, playing out, and what makes sense for all these issues we have to deal with?
So let me start with the premise that, first of all, the first definition is you have to define the mission. Okay. Step one, what's the mission? And it has to be a clearly identified mission, right? And by that I mean single verb, so that everybody that then comes to the task force always looks back to the mission statement. And so COVID I'll use as the example right away. The mission statement should be to ensure that SARS-CoV-2 has the least impact on the citizens of Alberta. Did you hear my mission
Mm.
statement? The
Yep.
least impact on the citizens of Alberta. One of those impacts is health, but all the other impacts, okay? So the least impact on the citizens of Alberta. Instead, the mission statement defined by the government of Alberta was to ensure that SARS-CoV-2 has the least impact on the healthcare system. See the difference in the two mission statements? One
Huge.
is
Yeah.
the citizens of Alberta, the other is the healthcare system. And that was the actual mission statement. Right. So
And now
everything that was done,
one's
sorry.
one's protecting the system and one is protecting citizens.
So let me take you back to
Yeah.
September
Yeah.
11th. The
Yeah.
mission statement from the premier was, and it was kind of really open ended, was what changed to security in Alberta. So right away, some of the people in the room looked around, and I told you about the 26 smartest people in Alberta. People looked around the room and said, what are they all doing here? All who should be in this room is police, right? How do we stop terrorists attacking this is a police job. There should be the head of the police, period.
Yeah.
Instead, there was people from every one of the private sector industries. There was people from all of the government that worked across all of the government with all of the citizens of Alberta in all those tubes that made up Alberta. And there was one policeman out of 26. So in the
Yeah.
healthcare thing, what there should be is the appropriate doctors, nurses, and practitioners, but with all the rest of the citizens present. In terms of all the industry in Alberta, what does healthcare mean for the pork industry, for the energy industry, for the water supply, for the wrong group of people in the task force? Because the mission statement is wrong. So what a task force isn't what you see walking around Alberta right now. That's a feedback system. Right now,
Mm.
what you're seeing, called a task force, is a group of people going out asking for feedback on ideas.
Yeah.
That's not a task force. A task force is when you have a clearly defined mission statement and you break out all the tasks given out of that mission statement and then pull them apart into the tasks implied. And then you assign working groups to drill down to develop options for each of the tasks given and implied. So let me again, there's a paper. If you go to the Frontier Center for Public Policy and read Redman, um, Canada's Deadly Response to COVID-19. Take the paper. I'm sorry, it's 136 pages long, but it describes the task force process step by step. What group do you actually need to define all the tasks given, all the tasks implied? How do you start with tasks given? They were already in a pre-written pandemic plan. So let's talk about healthcare in our discussion here. So what we need to do is the best healthcare system for the citizens of Alberta. Tasks
Yeah.
given. And so you can break down all the pieces of a healthcare system in terms of personal health, mental health, physical health, and then break it apart into um, um, uh, in the Army we had casualty evacuation, treatment, rehabilitation, surgical capability. Right? We broke it into the elements, but CASEVAC and everything else. But in front of that was an enforced daily physical regime to ensure that everybody was as physically fit as it could. Now, you can't do that, Canadian citizens, but in the Army, the whole medical system was based on the only interruption to your health will normally be a bullet. It won't be because your body breaks, right? So we need to build a healthcare
Well,
system that's different.
actually, I would challenge you in a public healthcare system. Why couldn't we say there has to be a daily activity? And that's what I think I mentioned this in the last session is during COVID in like one of the mandates that which was in Hinshaw, but it was Kenny, that they could have made the public health mandates is everybody in Alberta must eat one apple a day and there will be a bylaw officer at your door checking. Like it, they could have done things like this. So if the army can do it,
Well, there's a huge difference, right? The army's an authoritarian regime. Let's be clear. As a commanding officer, I had the ability to throw people for 3 weeks hard labor in Edmonton detention barracks if they didn't do what I said. I don't
okay,
want to
well,
live in a Canadian
that,
society
that,
like that, right?
that is the punishment.
Yeah. So
The
the
daily
whole idea of what
activity.
I'm trying to say, I agree with
Yes.
you totally. We should invert the pyramid. And at
Okay.
the base of the pyramid should be personal health and all the possible tools that the government can do to encourage people, like in Japan, to live a
Yeah.
very healthy lifestyle and to give them the information they need because not everyone comes from the same place. They might have grown up in a dysfunctional family and not realize that eating pizza pops 6 times a day isn't the best food category. And so you give them further education in the public education system and to
Yeah.
help them understand, the real food groups that they should be eating, but as well how physical exercise contributes and the information, the constant flow of information on our public broadcasting system about healthy lifestyle, healthy diet, and all the rest of that kind of stuff, not focusing on the treatment, the triage treatment, the collection, and all the rest of it, but government then making sure that we have an ambulance system, a recovery
Yeah.
system, and then all the rest of it. So but we need to start at the bottom, which is individual responsibility for the personal health so I don't want people going to the emergency ward when they have the common cold, right? That's not what you build a healthcare system for. That's
Yeah.
personal responsibility. It sucks. It takes 10 to 14 days to get over a cold. Suck it up and get on with it. Don't be a baby. I'm sorry. If the symptoms start to progressively get worse, then go to a clinic and seek some expertise to see if it's not just the common cold. But the first reaction is suck it up, right?
Yeah.
This too will pass, right? And same thing with COVID, right? This too will pass, right? But there were people who were in a category who were much more risk, 65 and older, with 3 or more severe comorbidities, and we should have been able to focus the appropriate assets on them, not on society as a whole. And so the whole idea of building a new healthcare system through a task force, let's get back to the task force. The task force needs to have representation from every one of the industrial groups. Why? Because what's the physical requirements and health risks associated with being someone who pulls heavy wire on a hydroelectric power line? What are the physical requirements for somebody that works as a carpenter? What's the physical requirement? And so that you start to develop a healthcare system that identifies all the citizens and their occupations that make up our society, that we can target and focus into large organizations like the Carpenters Union and the Pipe Fitters Union, the Boilermakers Union, where there's some real risks in running the steam generation plants and all the
Yeah.
rest of this. We can tailor health information for those environments to ensure they live the best lives they can for as long as they can in dangerous environments, right? Instead
Yeah.
of focusing on what happens when the boiler explodes, let's talk about making sure that it wasn't because you got lazy because your body let you down when you should have been doing. Keep you physically fit, keep you physically active, keep your mind ready to go, no matter what your trade or what the health advisory committee that builds it, that is brought together by the premier of a province, needs representation from all the major industries in the province, not just the doctors. They need
Yeah.
all the people that are practitioners in all the alternative types of healthcare, not just the doctors. We don't want to build a system that's focused only on hospitals. That's the resort of that's like the Canadian Forces. That's go where you go when everything else failed, right?
Yeah.
And not necessarily failed. Traffic accident, gee whiz, sorry, totally not your fault. We need that. Like in our Casevac system, you ended up in surgery and then treatment and then rehabilitation. But it shouldn't be the focus. You don't build a
Yeah.
healthcare system around hospitals. You build it on making sure no one ever goes to them.
Yeah. No, 100%. Um, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to
Well, just the
touch.
whole
Yeah.
idea.
Okay.
So when I wrote the paper, and I would,
Yes.
for those who are interested, I don't force feed anybody, but go to Frontier Center for Public Policy and read Canada 2024, a strong, resilient nation or a fearful, fractured country. The first half describes how we got here. But the second half is how to fix it with a real step-by-step process, and it describes the task force process on how to build a real task force to build a leadership, whether it's at the federal, provincial, territorial, or municipal level, that inspires our country, that gives them a way to create a vision that they can talk about with the electorate, and a way for the electorate to be involved in building that vision and then holding them to account. And the whole task force piece is laid out, and I did it in bullets, step by step, the common idea. But if you really want to see a task force laid out in detail, go again to the Frontier Center for Public Policy and read Redman, Canada's Deadly Response to COVID-19, because it shows you step by step how a task force can, in a very short time, in an iterative and well-defined, develop all the options. And remember, it's options. It's not a single plan. It develops options, and then the leadership picks the best options to get us to the best place, and the citizens decide if they picked the right options,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because they were involved. And the whole task force process then demands feedback, constant iterative feedback. In counterterrorism, everyone thinks I carried top secret with letter identifiers for most of my life in the Army and after. So I understand what's secret and what's not. We held a 2-day conference in Calgary after we got the plan done and signed by the premier, with media present and every municipal order of government, and we told them what we were going to do. We didn't tell them the detail. We didn't tell them, but we told them their roles, and we told all Albertans, go back to 2021, you'll see the press conference. We told them what we're doing and why we're doing it. And we made it very clear the process we'd followed, and we invited feedback. Did we get
Mhm.
it right? Tell us what you think we missed, right? And not just once, every month. Come back. Here's a website. You can dump anonymously all your ideas, your anger, your frustration, your compliments. There's a place to vent, right? Because September 11th was extremely emotional for many people in many ways. That's what we want now. That's what I want. I want a 25-year vision for our country built by a task force that represents all walks of life and all Canadians, with representative groups helping to build the model with all the options, and then ask Canadians, is this what you're looking for? This is
Yeah.
a purpose. Here's an inspiration. This is where we could all go together. Can we so it's a process that's been used for some pretty huge undertakings in our country and around the world. Why don't we try it and inspire politicians to inspire Canadians again? Give them a sense of purpose, so I don't have a meeting like I had a few days ago with a group that says Canadians are wandering. They have no sense of purpose anymore.
Yeah. No, I think all that again makes perfect sense. A lot of common sense and very reasonable. I think that it is time. Like people are desperate for this. When I started just speaking out more, it was just, I think people were desperate for credible information. But I also see that people are desperate for real leadership with principle and with vision and with respect, like all these things you kind of expect. And we've kind of lost it. So, I think we need to have more and more of these conversations. I'm a forever optimist. I don't know why. I think it's just a better way to live than be pessimistic all the
I
time.
think
I
I
don't know.
said it way back in Unity, and
Yeah.
somebody responded on X. Yeah, my wife always calls me Pollyanna, and he just burst out laughing on X. We're the same,
Yeah.
but we both believe in a better future and that it's achievable.
Yeah. Well, but we have to work for it. Like, it's not going to be handed to us. If it's handed to us, then number one, it's not worth it. And number two, that's just not how it's going to be. You
Yeah.
have to be part of it and demand it and ask questions and force conversation. So this has been wonderful. Obviously, thank you so much. For this and all of your continued work. I know, I think last time too, I mentioned that people have called on you to be the Prime Minister of Canada, which I would agree with, but also at the same time, just like if people listen to the words, the advice, the knowledge that you have, that's what you're looking to have a role in anyway, is just to share the knowledge. So I'm glad we're able to do that, at least here and maybe more. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for doing all of this.
Pleasure.